like a moth to a flame. By Reddit user StrongSite 348. My mother always hated psychic mediums. You know the whole deal. Creepy tent in the corner of the fair, tacky patterns and symbols on all the fabrics, and old woman with a cheap glass ball on a coffee table, covered with a blanket from Walmart. Nothing but crooks and charlatans preying on the weak-minded, she always used to say. Just taking money from the foolish or the desperate and charming them up with parlor tricks and cold reading. We would never waste the gift on such tacky nonsense. The gift. That's what she called it. It was a gift that my nights were filled with endless terrors and predictions of all the tragedies that would befall me in the near future. It was a gift that the other kids would never play with the weirdo. It was a gift that being around too many people blinded the eye behind my eyes with noxiously colored auras, and crowded my head with the painful babblings of a dozen voices, whispering into the ear behind my ears. The schools thought I was autistic. They called that a gift, too. My mother taught me how to control myself. Now, she wasn't teaching me how to become some crime-fighting psychic detective or superhero, or anything cool like that. She taught me how to live without clawing my hair out every day. I learned how to silence the voices, to read minds only when I wanted to, and to mingle the rest with background noise. She taught me how to interpret my dreams and separate the nonsense possibilities from the dreadful certainties. Most importantly, however, was teaching me not to pretend I don't know more about people than what they have already told me, and not finish their sentences for them. I used to do that a lot. Again, school chalked it up to autism, the gift of an atypical mind. She taught me well, but I never had a chance to learn it all. I remember that day, I was in algebra class, and we were in the middle of a test when I felt it. It was like an ocean of dread washing over me. I knew right then and there what had happened. I dropped my pencil and I walked out of the classroom. I could hear my heart thumping in my chest as I made my way to the principal's office, sitting in a nearby chair that I found myself in almost every week. "Dylan, please come to the principal's office," I heard over the loudspeaker, already opening the door when he began to speak. I caught Principal Gallard with his hand still on the microphone, the shock evident on his face. He said quite a few very cruel things in his head about the weird kid before being overcome with a wave of guilt for the thought. I didn't mind. Mom had taught me not to judge people for their intrusive thoughts. "My mother is dead," I said before he could have a chance to speak. He avoided eye contact and his cheeks reddened. No. He stuttered. "She's just been hurt, kid. I don't know how bad, but she's on her way to the hospital. The police are on their way to bring you there. I'm sure she will be okay." She wasn't. She was dead before she reached the hospital, and I never got to say goodbye. There's an old joke about charlatan psychics failing to foresee disaster as proof that they are frauds. The truth is more complicated than that. We have premonitions of our own demise constantly. Our dreams show us every possibly tragedy, not every likely tragedy. Sometimes we see something useful, like knowing when to take extra care before crossing a street because a drunk driver is coming, or when your friend won't get the joke, and you'll make an ass of yourself if you say it. Most of the time, however, they are wild, impractical situations that would never happen. The random thugs rob the restaurant your mother works at and shoot her 9 times for $150 in the registered dreams come almost weekly. You tend to filter them out as nonsense, and you ironically never see them coming. I never met another person like us after she died. I was sent to live with my father's parents. I could always sense the brightness of my mother's soul, shining with the strength of her gift. If normal souls glowed like candles in the dark, she was a light bulb, shining brighter than 100 normal people combined. I never met my father, but she said he was just like her. Wherever he got the gift, it was not from my grandparents. Grandma was just a normal candle. And Grandpa, well, bless his soul, but he was more like a match. One of those soft ones from the little cardboard books they use to light pipes. They did well enough to raise me, but they had nothing to teach me. I doubt they even understood what it was, and I was not about to tell them. Mom said not to trust anyone who wasn't like me, not even family. The years moved on, I grew up, and I was always alone. I had friends, of course, and I even dated here or there. Even when surrounded by people who cared about me, there was always the lingering fact that there was nobody quite like me. Nobody to relate to. Nobody to talk to. And, although it pains my ego to admit it, nobody to teach me more about the gift. I don't know what else my mother was saving for later in life, but something tells me the education was not meant to end at 12 years old. I guess that's why I always had a thing for psychic readings. I tell myself it's because I find them funny. Seeing people pretend to have what I have and doing a poor show of it makes me feel special, especially when I use the gift to trip them up. The truth is that, beneath it all, I think I am just looking for another. Mom said, real psychics don't sell the gift for $20 a pop. But I have been a broke college student, and I know how tempting it can be. I feel shame at the thought of it, but I did do a handful of parlor tricks among friends when I was running, especially low. Just for ramen money, and I always acted like there was a reasonable explanation. I can understand why someone might stoop lower than that, if they were desperate enough. My interest in meeting new psychic mediums to humiliate is why I agreed to go out with my coworkers last weekend. I'm always up for a chance to find and embarrass another scammer. He wants to invite me to the winter fair, I thought as Jason approached my desk on Friday. Hey Dylan, some of us were planning on going to the fair this weekend. Wanna come? I had time to consider the offer before it was made. Maybe who all will be there? I asked, as if I didn't already know. Just you, me, Bob, Sarah, and Jane. He said, they are all good colleagues, and Jason is almost a friend, but I was the most interested by Jane's presence. She always has the most mushy, intrusive thoughts whenever I look at her, and I would be a liar if I were to say I wasn't at least open to them. And so the weekend came, and we went off to see the fair. Ice sculptures, children skating on a frozen pond, out-of-season Christmas decorations, the works. I was delighted to read a brochure advertising that a psychic booth was set up on the opposite side of the grounds for some woman named Madame LeBeau, but I had barely read the words when I was struck by a sensation I had never felt in my life. It was like when you step out of a dark room and into the sunlight. The eye behind my eyes was momentarily blinded, and my temple felt like I was struck on the forehead by a hammer. Yeah. I'd like that, Jason. Would you like yeah, I'll get you a hot chocolate, Jason said, asking a question I had already answered. I haven't slipped up like that in months, but my mind was out of focus. Across the grounds, at what I assume was the psychic's tent, was a soul more intense than any I had seen before. My mother was a light bulb among candles, but this Madame LeBeau, as I assumed she must be, felt like a lighthouse beacon in the fog. I was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. I pushed my friends away, and I walked through the snow. I ignored the people around me, ignored their bodies and their minds to push through them on the straightest path. This soul drew me closer with each step, as if guiding my way through booths and sculptures and crowds. Soon I could see her tent, just as tacky as all of the others I had seen. But I just knew deep within that all my questions were about to be answered, that all of my problems were moments away from being erased. My thoughts for the first time in forever were calm and set on one path. And then I was sucker punched in the back of the head. I lost concentration. I fell into the snow. I could hear the thoughts of those around me, a dozen strangers wondering what had just happened. Why that woman had just assaulted me out of nowhere. I looked up to my assailant, and I saw her standing over me. She was winded, as if she had run to me from a great distance, and her hand was still balled in a fist. She was around my age, with red hair and piercing green eyes. Her soul grew before my eyes. I had never seen a soul change, or, as I quickly realized, I had never seen my own perception of a soul change. She had the gift, and she was looking at me as if I had grown 3 eyes. "What the hell are you doing?" I heard her voice in my mind. My mother taught me to speak without speaking, and she only used it in emergencies. "Why aren't you cloaking?" "It sees you." "What? Cloaking? What are you talking about?" I asked sheepishly, my mind still in a daze. Who was this woman, and why did she distract me from meeting Madame Lebeau? Her face changed to an expression of confusion, followed by understanding. She grabbed my head and turned my face back to the tent. The light was still there, but now I could see what had fallen beneath my perception before. It was wrong. I had been blinded by its intensity and had missed the putrid rot that permeated the light. The light was malignant, and now that I had broken free, it was angry. I was pulled to my feet and running before I knew what was happening. The girl led me through the crowds, the baleful eye glaring into my soul as we ran. For the first time in my life, I realized that there might be a damn good reason why I have never met anyone else like me. My mother told me I was the lucky one. I'm trying to figure out what she meant by Scary Max. My mother wasn't the type to read me stories in bed. From a young age, I was expected to lie quietly in the dark, staring up at the ceiling as I waited for sleep to take me, which is why I was more than a little surprised to see her stumble into my room close to midnight. From the vague blue glow of streetlights coming through my bedroom window, I could tell it was her, but she smelled different, like ozone and alcohol. "There he is," she said, "the lucky one." "Huh?" I said. "I thought you might be having trouble sleeping," she said, her voice quivering slightly as she spoke. "I thought I might tell you a bedtime story." I was 12 years old then, far too old for such things, and even back in elementary school, she wasn't the sort of mom who put me to sleep with Dr. Seuss's or the Chronicles of Narnia. The few times I'd snuck out of bed, I'd found her hunched over a crossword puzzle with a cup of tea, dutifully double-checking her answers. "Okay," I said quietly. She breathed in deep. She was staring at me intently. That was something she never did. Most of the time, Mom seemed eager to look at anything but me. "When you were 6, she began, "you got this cough. No one thought much of it at first. You had a lot of coughs in those days. But then some time went on, and it persisted. A week later, your dad noticed red spots on a tissue and took you to urgent care. At first, doctors thought the X-ray was a simple infection, something that could be treated with antibiotics. But something looked a bit off, so a specialist was consulted. She eventually diagnosed you with a rare form of lung cancer. Several forms of treatment were attempted, including a surgery followed by radiation and chemotherapy. But in the end, it was all in vain. You never went another hour in your life without coughing. Eventually, you died choking to death on your own blood." She rubbed at the bridge of her nose. She seemed to be crying a bit. "Mom," I said, "I don't get it." "It's a horrible story, isn't it?" she asked. "Sometimes I imagine a horrible thing, and then I blink, and I'm back to the present moment, and everything is fine, and I'm so relieved that I just get this serene feeling." "Okay," I said. "Maybe it'll help you fall asleep, knowing you're the lucky one," she said. That whole story I just told, it didn't happen to you. Not really. Yeah, I said, shifting a bit uncomfortably under the covers. Maybe. She thought for a second. Can I tell you one more? She asked. I didn't want her to. If I'm going to be honest, I was starting to feel afraid. There was something off about the way she looked, even the way she sounded. It was definitely my mother's voice, but it was distorted in some almost imperceptible way, like she'd aged 20 years or spent the whole night screaming. Okay, I said, though it was not okay. When you were 14, you were walking home from a school dance, she said. I'm not 14 yet, I said. Please don't interrupt, she said, suddenly very serious. When you were 14, where was I the dance? You were walking home, and a very bad man grabbed you. He threw you in the back of a van and stabbed you over and over again, until your blood gushed out of you, and you were whispering for me as the life left your eyes. And then he simply dropped your body in a river where it was never found. And he was never caught. And in fact, somewhere, he's still grabbing people and murdering them quickly and efficiently. And, in fact, he never will be caught. He'll simply get bored of it all after a few dozen more and go back to his normal life as a truck driver. And as he ages, his mind will start to go, and he'll convince himself it was all a dream. He'll deceive himself so convincingly that he won't even feel guilty anymore. He won't feel bad at all. She was definitely crying now. Mom, I said, you're scaring me. You don't need to be scared, she said. You're the lucky one, right? You can just think of this story, think of it, and then come back to yourself. You're the lucky little boy in bed, all safe and snugly, where nothing can hurt you. I think I'd better get to sleep, I said, instinctively moving away from her. It's getting late. She put a hand on my ankle. Even through the covers, I could tell that her touch was different. Her grip was stronger than it should have been, and it felt cold through the cotton. One more, she said, and then you can sleep. In the light coming through the window, I saw something glinting in her free hand. It was long and metal. It was hard to tell for sure, but it looked like some kind of blade. Is that a knife? I asked quietly. One more story, she repeated. I didn't say a word, which I suppose she took as a yes. When you were just a baby, I didn't sleep enough. You cried and cried and cried. Your poor mother. You didn't let me sleep. Your father couldn't take it either, of course, but he just walked down the hall and slept on the couch. I couldn't do that. I was Mom. And then one morning, I woke up and you were cold beside me, not breathing even a bit. And I had this vague memory of maybe putting a pillow over you in the middle of the night, just to quiet you down. And maybe I held it there a little too long. I was too sleep-deprived to really know, of course. Eventually, I had to answer a lot of questions from doctors and psychiatrists and such. But finally, they just sort of threw their hands up and called it an accident. Maybe it was. But in my heart, I always sort of knew it wasn't. I felt my heart beating harder now. She hadn't let go of my ankle the whole time she was telling this final story. The blade glinted in her free hand. So why are you the lucky one? She asked, her voice breaking. What did you do? Why you? I don't know, I said. You don't get it, she said. I've seen myself 100 different ways. Sometimes I'm a little fatter, sometimes a little skinnier. Sometimes maybe I've dyed my hair, but I'm always alive. I'm not even all that different. But you're always dead. Always. Until this time, she was breathing harder now, starting to raise her voice. Why are you so goddamn lucky? Mom! I screamed. And with that, the woman quickly rose from my bed, straightening her skirt, and walked quickly out of the room. "Mom!" I screamed again. A few seconds later, my mother walked into the room and turned on the light. She was completely normal, dressed in some oversized pajamas, her hair still wet from showering. She looked at me curiously. "What's wrong?" she asked. I tried to find the words, but all I could say was, "I got scared." "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "There's nothing to be scared of." Even in the dark, I could tell she was rolling her eyes. "Could you stay with me?" I asked. "Just for a little bit, until I fall asleep." "You're practically a teenager," she said. As she spoke, she looked toward my feet and picked something up off the floor. It was a knife, maybe 6 inches long. "Where'd you get this?" she asked. "It isn't mine," I answered quietly. "You're a liar," she said bitterly, "and a little coward." For a moment, she looked at the knife thoughtfully, turning it over in the moonlight. Then she took the weapon and left, closing the door behind her and leaving me in the dark. Soon, I heard the scratch of her pencil as she got out her crosswords. I was alone, utterly alone in the dark, and for once I was glad. I kept listening to the distant scratching until I fell asleep. My neighbor always lights a candle in the window at midnight. One night, I decided to light a candle too, and now I can't sleep anymore. By Carl Sefni. My name is John, a young man who just moved out of his parents' house at the age of 20. In search of a lower cost of living, I decided to move to the small town of Ranneville Bay in southwest Michigan. It's one of those American towns you see in movies, spaced out houses all built similarly. Most of the residents are elderly, making it very quiet for most of the year, no noisy parties, speeding cars, or anything like that, which I particularly love. However, shortly after moving, I noticed something strange. My neighbor, Mr. Anderson, has the peculiar habit of lighting a candle every night, religiously at 12 p.m., and placing it in his window. He stands there for about 15 minutes, gazing at it, and then goes to sleep. On nights of strong wind or rain, he tends to shield it with something similar to a lantern. I really wanted to know what that was all about. Was it a superstition? A local tradition? Ancient enough for only the oldest of elders to remember? I didn't even know how to ask him about it. I briefly mentioned it to an elderly woman, Mrs. Percy, a very kind neighbor who would often show up at my door with sweets and cakes. When I asked, however, she simply changed the subject, and this happened more than once. One day, I gathered the courage to approach Mr. Anderson directly. I walked up to his door, nervous, and knocked. He opened it with a friendly smile, and I, hesitatingly, started asking about the candle. He listened to my question, and for a moment his eyes seemed distant, as if recalling something. Then he simply said, "It's just a family tradition. Nothing for you to worry about, young man." Unsatisfied with the vague answer, I tried to insist for more details, but he politely closed the door, saying he preferred to keep family traditions a secret. I was frustrated, but my curiosity only grew. I decided to search for information at a small cultural center in town, hoping to find some record that explained the tradition or someone who could shed light on it. However, my effort was in vain. The files were scarce, and the few available details about Ranneville Bay didn't mention anything about lighting candles. I tried talking to the officials who handled the center, but they acted similarly to Mrs. Percy. Gradually, all this denial of information became an obsession for me. I waited all night by the window, just waiting for the moment when he would light the candle. On a holiday eve, I even stayed up all night to see if the candle would go out, or when he would remove it. He removed it at exactly 6 a.m. I was running out of ideas. For a while, I even kept an eye on the neighbors' houses, watching if they would do the same. For some reason, only Mr. Anderson had this habit. With few options left, I went for my emergency plan. On that day, exactly at 12, I placed a candle in my window and lit it. It had been an intense workday, and I really needed to sleep. But I couldn't now. I sat in an uncomfortable chair in my room, facing the candle to avoid falling asleep. It didn't work so well because slowly, Orpheus called me with his sweet song, leading me into Hypnos's arms. I was relaxed, unconscious, when I heard a noise that made me jump from the chair. It was knocks, something hitting against the wood of my door. I looked through the window and saw Mr. Anderson at my doorstep. He knocked one more time. "I need to come in," he shouted. "Let me in." I rushed down the stairs, still confused with everything. I approached the door as the pleas intensified. But when I reached the door, about to grab the handle, something triggered my instinct. I felt there was something wrong, and I decided to check before opening. I approached the peephole, staring at the one who disturbed my sleep. He was there, the familiar neighbor, but different. His mouth was open at an unconventional angle. The voice didn't come from his lips. It seemed to emanate from the black hole that was his mouth. His eyes darted frantically from side to side, unfocused on anything. From his chin, a thick foam dripped, forming puddles on the floor. His arms, now bleeding and twisted, seemed crushed by the wood, judging by the way they contorted. The blows intensified, almost as if the door was about to come off its hinges. I ran to one of the cabinets and pushed it to block the passage. It went on like this all night until 6 a.m. I wondered why no neighbor woke up with all this racket. I saw him through the window, returning home, entering, and exactly at 6 a.m., appearing at his window to remove the candle. The rest of the day was a nightmare. I was sleep-deprived and had to drink about 5 cups of coffee to make it through the workday. This sleepless night left me like a human wreck. I had to go to work in that state, and the 5th cup of coffee in my hand felt like an illusory comfort as I tried to stay awake. I couldn't help but think about the events of the previous night. The image of Mr. Anderson desperately banging on my door haunted my thoughts with every blink. At the end of the workday, I decided I needed to understand what was going on. I took the way back home, nervous, tense. The town was shrouded in a peculiar silence, and the lights of the houses hummed faintly. The street was deserted, with no signs of life besides me and the small details that made up the landscape, like the occasional passing car or barking dog. As I approached home, I spotted Mr. Anderson in the distance. A wave of terror hit me, and I thought about turning back, avoiding the inevitable encounter. However, something inside me insisted that I needed to face that situation. He was walking slowly towards me, completely normal. His friendly and welcoming smile was back, in contrast to the hole that was his mouth the night before. He waved when our eyes met. The scene was so distinct from the disturbing image of the previous night that I almost questioned my own sanity. "Good afternoon, John," he greeted, as if nothing had happened. "Good afternoon, Mr. Anderson," I replied, trying to keep calm, even though my heart was still racing. I hoped he would mention something about the previous night, but he continued the conversation as if nothing were different. We talked about the weather, the neighborhood, trivial things that made no sense in the face of the terrible experience we shared. I was eager to get inside, passed by him and went in, but before closing the door, I couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Anderson, are you okay?" He frowned, as if trying to remember, but then shrugged. "Oh, the usual, young man. A backache here and there, but nothing major." I didn't know what to think. His answer was so casual, as if I were imagining things. He greeted me, and I saw that there wasn't even a scar, let alone wounds on his hands and arms. Could it have been my imagination? Unfortunately not. I'm well aware of that now, because night after night, he comes to scream at my window, saying he needs to come in, regardless of whether I have a candle lit or not. Believe me, I've tried both solutions, with no result. I'm really starting to get used to this. It wouldn't be such a big problem until yesterday. I was setting up the desk to block the door, as always. I had already put the furniture on standby when Mr. Anderson started his nightly noise. I was about to go up to my room, put on my headphones, and sleep when I passed by the staircase facing the back door. And then, while my neighbor screamed desperately that he needed to come in, I heard a single knock on the door in front of me. Since I lit a candle in my window, my neighbor asks every night for me to let him in. And now, there's something knocking on my back door.